"You never contribute anything meaningful to this family," my mother said, cutting into her steak while my father nodded in agreement. What they didn't know was that I had been secretly documenting every dollar, every hour, every sacrifice I had made for them over the past 8 years. And I was about to show them exactly what happens when someone who never contributes suddenly stops contributing everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The dining room at the Riverside Country Club felt suffocating that evening in March, despite its soaring ceilings and panoramic windows overlooking the manicured golf course. The crystal chandelier cast harsh shadows across the white tablecloth where my parents, Gregory and Patricia Whitmore, sat celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary, with what they believed would be a quiet family dinner. I had arrived precisely on time, as always, wearing the navy blazer my mother had specifically requested because it photographed well for their social media posts. At 28 years old, I had learned that family gatherings were performances where every detail mattered to maintain the pristine image that had become more important to my parents than actual relationships. My younger sister Caroline was notably absent, which surprised no one. She was in Milan for Fashion Week, funded by what my parents called her Artistic Development Fund. But what I knew was actually the rental income from 3 investment properties I had helped them acquire and manage over the past 5 years. Caroline had discovered photography 2 years earlier and decided it was her calling, a revelation that had cost our parents $60,000 in equipment and international travel expenses. The conversation had been predictably centered around Caroline's latest adventures, her artistic vision, and her promising career prospects, when my father shifted the topic to something that made my stomach tighten with familiar dread. "We've been thinking about expanding the property portfolio again," Gregory announced, cutting into his prime rib with the confidence of someone who had never personally negotiated a real estate transaction. Patricia found a promising duplex in the Hawthorne district that could generate excellent rental income. My mother leaned forward with the excitement she reserved for spending money on things that would enhance their social status. "The listing agent says it has tremendous potential for appreciation. It's exactly the kind of investment that builds generational wealth." I set down my fork carefully, already knowing where this conversation was headed. "Have you run the numbers on cash flow and maintenance costs? The Hawthorne district has some rental regulation changes coming that could affect profitability." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, you know we don't get bogged down in all those tedious details. That's what property managers are for. We're focused on the bigger picture." The bigger picture, I had learned over years of these conversations, meant the prestige of owning multiple properties and the social currency that came with discussing their real estate portfolio at dinner parties. The actual work of researching markets, analyzing deals, coordinating inspections, managing tenant relationships, and handling maintenance issues was something that happened invisibly, performed by people whose contributions were rarely acknowledged. "Who's handling the due diligence and financing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Gregory smiled in the way that meant he was about to delegate responsibility, while maintaining credit for the decision. "We were hoping you could take a look at it. You're so good with all that analytical work, and frankly, we trust your judgment more than these real estate agents who are just trying to make commissions." This was how it always began. A casual request for help with something they considered beneath their direct involvement, coupled with flattery about my capabilities and trustworthiness. What would follow was months of unpaid work researching properties, coordinating inspections, negotiating contracts, arranging financing, and managing every detail of the acquisition process. Then, once the property was generating income and adding to their investment portfolio, the story would change. The success would become evidence of their shrewd investment strategy and business acumen. My role would be minimized to helping out with some of the paperwork, or forgotten entirely in favor of narrative that positioned them as sophisticated real estate investors. "I can take a preliminary look," I said carefully, "but my consulting practice has been extremely busy lately. I might not have the bandwidth for a full analysis." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Patricia's smile became razor thin, and Gregory's expression hardened in the way that meant my response was being interpreted as defiance rather than reasonable boundary setting. "Busy with what, exactly?" Patricia asked, her tone carrying the subtle edge that had terrified me as a child but now simply made me tired. "Your little freelance projects?" My little freelance projects included a client roster of 8 companies for whom I provided strategic planning, operational optimization, and business development consulting. Last year alone, my recommendations had helped these businesses increase their combined revenue by over $12 million, while reducing operational costs by an average of 23%. But in my parents' narrative, my work was a hobby I pursued to fill time until I found a real career with an established company, preferably one impressive enough to mention at their social gatherings. The fact that I had deliberately chosen independent consulting because it allowed me to work with diverse clients and maintain control over my schedule was interpreted as lack of ambition rather than strategic career planning. My consulting practice generated $420,000 in revenue last year, I replied evenly. I'm working with clients in healthcare, manufacturing, and financial services to optimize their operations and improve profitability. Gregory made a dismissive sound that suggested my financial success was either exaggerated or irrelevant. Revenue isn't profit, Elena. And consulting is fundamentally unstable. You're one economic downturn away from losing everything. This criticism would have carried more weight if it weren't coming from someone whose own career consisted of managing inherited wealth and making investment decisions with family money that had been accumulated by previous generations. Gregory had never held a traditional job, built a business from nothing, or generated income through his own skills and efforts. I'm well aware of the difference between revenue and profit, I said, keeping my voice level despite the familiar frustration building in my chest. My profit margin last year was 67%, and I maintain an emergency fund covering 18 months of expenses. I'm probably more financially stable than most people with traditional employment. Patricia laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. Financial stability isn't just about money, dear. It's about building something meaningful, something that contributes to society. Caroline's photography is going to be exhibited in galleries. She's creating art that will outlast all of us. The irony was suffocating. Caroline's photography career existed entirely because of financial support from our parents, which was itself dependent on income generated by investment properties that I had researched, acquired, and managed. The meaningful contribution to society was being funded by rental income from working families who paid market rates for housing that generated profit margins my parents used to subsidize their daughters' artistic pursuits. Meanwhile, my work helping businesses operate more efficiently, creating jobs and improving profitability, was dismissed as meaningless because it didn't fit their definition of prestige or social acceptability. Speaking of contributing to society, I said, deciding to address the underlying tension directly, I've been thinking about the family foundation tax strategy we discussed last year. There might be some opportunities to restructure charitable giving in ways that provide better tax advantages while supporting causes you care about. This was my mistake. I had offered to help with something that mattered to them, which gave them permission to criticize my previous contributions while simultaneously demanding more effort from me. Patricia's expression shifted into what I had come to recognize as her lecture mode. Elena, that's exactly what we mean about your perspective on these things. You're always focused on the technical details instead of the bigger picture. Tax strategy is fine, but what we really need is someone who understands the social impact and legacy implications. Someone like Caroline, Gregory added helpfully. She has such a natural understanding of aesthetics and presentation. When we redesign the foundation's public materials, her artistic eye will be invaluable. I stared at them both, feeling the familiar sensation of being erased from my own accomplishments. The Family Foundation had been my idea. I had researched the legal requirements, coordinated with attorneys to establish the structure, developed the mission statement and grant criteria, and managed the application process for tax-exempt status. I had also designed the website, created the operational procedures, and established relationships with charitable organizations that aligned with our stated mission. But Caroline would be credited with the aesthetic vision because she had once commented that the logo could use better typography, and somehow her input on visual design would be remembered, while my work on legal structure, tax optimization, and operational systems would be forgotten. I think there might be some confusion about roles and contributions, I said, choosing my words carefully. I'd like to clarify exactly what each family member has been responsible for, especially regarding the foundation and the property investments. Gregory's face flushed slightly, which usually meant he was preparing to assert authority rather than engage in actual discussion. Elena, I think you're overcomplicating things. Families work together. Everyone contributes in their own way. Caroline contributes creativity and vision. You contribute analytical skills. Your mother and I provide leadership and strategic direction. And funding, Patricia added, as if this settled the matter entirely. The funding, of course, came from investments I had researched and acquisitions I had managed, generating returns that supported both Caroline's artistic career and their lifestyle of strategic philanthropy and social prominence. But pointing this out would be dismissed as petty scorekeeping rather than legitimate concern about recognition and fairness. I'd like to see a formal accounting of contributions, I said, surprised by my own directness. Financial contributions, time investments, operational work, and outcomes achieved. I think it would be helpful for everyone to understand exactly how our family collaboration has functioned. The silence that followed was arctic. Patricia and Gregory exchanged the kind of look that parents share when their child has said something that crosses invisible boundaries they didn't know existed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Patricia spoke first, her voice carrying the kind of controlled disappointment that had shaped my childhood fear of conflict. Elena, that's exactly what we mean about your attitude lately. Everything has to be quantified and measured and accounted for. Families don't operate like businesses. We support each other because we love each other, not because we're keeping score. But keeping score is exactly what you're doing, I replied, feeling 8 years of accumulated resentment finally finding voice. You keep score of Caroline's artistic achievements and social recognition. You keep score of your charitable giving and community involvement. You keep score of your investment returns and property acquisitions. The only contributions you don't keep score of are mine. Gregory's voice carried the finality of someone who was ending rather than engaging in discussion. Elena, I think you need to step back and consider whether this attitude is helping or hurting your relationships with the people who love you most. Caroline never demands credit for her contributions. She simply does what needs to be done because she cares about the family. Quote, Caroline, who had contributed exactly 0 hours of work and $0 of funding to any family project, but whose aesthetic opinions and social media presence had somehow become more valuable than the systematic work that made everything else possible. The moment of absolute clarity came with Patricia's next words, delivered with the casual cruelty that only family members can achieve. You never contribute anything meaningful to this family. You focus on technical details and spreadsheets. But you miss the bigger picture of what we're trying to build together. Maybe if you spent less time keeping track of who does what, and more time thinking about how to add real value, you'd understand why Caroline's contributions are so much more significant than your administrative work. Administrative work. 8 years of strategic analysis, financial planning, property management, legal coordination, and business development reduced to administrative work. 8 years of generating income, optimizing investments, and building systems that supported their lifestyle and funded their priorities, dismissed as spreadsheet maintenance. I looked at my parents across the pristine white tablecloth, surrounded by the understated elegance of a country club membership that was paid for with investment returns I had generated, discussing plans for property acquisitions I would research and foundation activities I would coordinate, while explaining to me that I never contributed anything meaningful. You're absolutely right, I said, reaching for my purse with movements that felt strangely calm given the magnitude of what I was about to do. I have been focused on the wrong things entirely. I placed 3 manila envelopes on the table between the crystal glasses and polished silverware. Each envelope was labeled with precise handwriting: property management, foundation administration, and financial planning. These contain detailed documentation of every contribution I've made to family projects over the past 8 years, I said, my voice steady and professional. Financial investments, time commitments, operational work, and measurable outcomes. Since you feel my contributions haven't been meaningful, I thought you should have clear records of exactly what those non-meaningful contributions included. Patricia glanced at the envelopes with the expression of someone who had been handed something distasteful. Elena, this is exactly what we mean about your approach to relationships. You're right again, I said, standing and smoothing my blazer. My approach to relationships has been completely wrong. I've been contributing to projects where my work isn't valued, supporting people who don't appreciate the support, and investing time and energy in family activities that are apparently meaningless. Gregory's voice carried a warning tone. Elena, I think you should be very careful about the decisions you make when you're emotional. I'm not emotional, I replied truthfully. I'm clear. For the first time in years, I'm completely clear about my priorities and how I want to invest my time and energy. I walked toward the exit, leaving the envelopes on the table like documents presented as evidence in a case that had already been decided. At the doorway, I turned back to see my parents staring at the manila folders as if they contained something dangerous. The property management folder includes keys, contact information for tenants and contractors, maintenance schedules, and upcoming lease renewals. I said. The foundation folder has grant applications, tax documentation, and contact information for current charity partners. The financial planning folder contains investment recommendations, market analysis, and strategic projections for the next 18 months. Patricia looked up with the first hint of uncertainty I had seen all evening. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying that someone who never contributes anything meaningful shouldn't be responsible for managing property portfolios, administering charitable foundations, or providing financial planning services, I said. I'm saying that administrative work is apparently beneath the standards of this family, so I'm discontinuing my administrative work effective immediately. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that had always existed but was only now being acknowledged. Gregory and Patricia Whitmore, sophisticated socialites and strategic philanthropists, were about to discover exactly what happened when the person doing all the work they had dismissed as meaningless suddenly stopped doing that work. Elena, Gregory said carefully, let's not make any hasty decisions. Perhaps we can discuss this more thoughtfully when everyone has had time to process. There's nothing hasty about this decision, I replied. I've been processing it for 8 years. Tonight you simply helped me reach the logical conclusion. I walked out of the Riverside Country Club into the cool March evening, leaving my parents with 3 manila envelopes full of documentation and the beginning of understanding about what they had just lost. What they would discover over the following weeks was that their sophisticated investment strategy, their meaningful charitable work, and their impressive social status had been entirely dependent on someone whose contributions they had dismissed as administrative busywork. What I would discover was that walking away from people who don't value your contributions is the first step toward building a life with people who do. But that realization was still ahead of me, along with the most challenging and ultimately transformational period of my life. The drive home from the country club felt like emerging from underwater into clear air. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of other people's expectations or the burden of unacknowledged responsibility. I was simply Elena Rodriguez, driving through the city lights with no obligations except to myself and no one to answer to except my own conscience. I had no idea that this moment of clarity would lead to the most difficult 6 months of my life, followed by achievements that would surpass anything I had thought possible. I didn't know that losing my family's approval would teach me the value of earning my own respect, or that walking away from their projects would create space for building something entirely my own. All I knew was that I had finally stopped pretending that invisible work would eventually be recognized, that unpaid labor would eventually be appreciated, and that family relationships built on convenient exploitation would eventually transform into mutual respect. The transformation ahead would test every belief I held about loyalty, success, and self-worth. It would require rebuilding my identity from someone who derived value from being useful to others into someone who created value through authentic contribution to meaningful work. But that night, driving home from the country club with 3 empty manila envelopes in my rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The quiet satisfaction of choosing myself over the expectations of people who had never bothered to understand what they were asking me to sacrifice. The real story was just beginning. The lessons that would ultimately save me from the wreckage of that March evening at the Riverside Country Club began 23 years earlier in the cramped apartment above Rodriguez Auto Repair in East Portland. My grandmother, Carmen Rodriguez, had immigrated from Guadalajara in 1965 with 2 suitcases, limited English, and an unshakable belief that work was the only currency that mattered in building a meaningful life. Carmen never spoke about the circumstances that brought her to Portland, but neighborhood stories suggested she had left behind complications involving a husband who drank too much and a family that expected her to accept whatever life handed her. What she carried instead was a philosophy that would shape every major decision I would make over the next 3 decades. Mija, never let anyone convince you that your work has no value. If they cannot see the value, the problem is with their eyes, not with your hands. The auto repair shop belonged to my grandfather, Miguel Rodriguez, who had built the business from a single-bay garage into the most trusted automotive service center in Southeast Portland. Miguel understood engines the way musicians understand instruments, through intuition, experience, and an ability to diagnose problems that others couldn't identify. But it was Carmen who understood the business side of the operation. While Miguel focused on the technical work that brought customers through the door, Carmen managed every other aspect of the enterprise. She handled customer communications, maintained financial records, coordinated parts orders, scheduled appointments, managed vendor relationships, and developed the operational systems that allowed a small business to compete with larger chain operations. Carmen's work was invisible to most customers, who saw only Miguel's expertise under the hood of their vehicles. But Miguel understood exactly what his wife contributed, and he made sure everyone else understood as well. During every customer interaction, he would defer to Carmen for scheduling, pricing, and timeline estimates. When customers praised his technical skills, he would redirect credit to my business partner, who makes sure everything else works perfectly. This partnership model became the foundation for how I understood collaborative work. Value wasn't determined by visibility or recognition from outsiders. Value was determined by essential contribution to shared outcomes. Miguel and Carmen succeeded because they recognized and respected each other's expertise, not because they competed for credit or minimized each other's contributions. I spent summers working in the shop from age 7 onward, initially helping Carmen with filing and basic customer service, later learning diagnostic skills from Miguel, and eventually understanding how both technical excellence and operational efficiency were required for sustainable success. The work was demanding, often frustrating, and frequently unappreciated by customers who wanted quick fixes to complex problems. But the lessons I absorbed during those summers would prove invaluable decades later, when I needed to understand the difference between being useful to others and being essential to meaningful work. Carmen taught me that competence was built through consistent effort applied over extended periods. She showed me how to maintain detailed records, not for bureaucratic compliance, but because accurate information was the foundation for good decision-making. She demonstrated that customer relationships were built through reliability and honest communication, rather than impressive presentations or manipulative charm. Most importantly, Carmen modeled how to maintain dignity and self-respect while serving others. She never confused service with subservience. When customers were unreasonable, she remained professional but firm. When vendors tried to take advantage of the business, she negotiated from a position of knowledge and strength. When family members suggested that her work was less important than Miguel's because it wasn't mechanical, she corrected their misunderstanding without anger but with absolute clarity. "Some people think that work you cannot see is not real work," she told me during one of our evening conversations while reviewing the day's receipts. "They think that keeping records is easier than fixing engines. They think that talking to customers is simpler than diagnosing problems. But you know what happens when I stop keeping records or talking to customers? The whole business stops working, no matter how good Miguel is with engines." This lesson would prove prophetic 20 years later when I discovered that my parents had similar blind spots about invisible work and essential contributions. Carmen also taught me about the psychology of appreciation and recognition. She never demanded credit for her contributions, but she also never allowed others to minimize or dismiss her work. When customers complimented the shop's efficiency and organization, she accepted the praise gracefully. When family members suggested that running the business office was less demanding than the physical work Miguel performed, she invited them to spend a week managing customer communications, vendor relationships, and financial planning. The invitation was never accepted, but the point was made clearly: Competence in one area doesn't automatically translate to competence in other areas, and invisible work often requires skills that visible work doesn't demand. My parents, Gregory and Patricia Whitmore, represented everything that Carmen had taught me to be skeptical of. They had inherited wealth rather than creating it, pursued status rather than competence, and confused presentation with substance in ways that would have made Carmen laugh if the consequences weren't so damaging to the people around them. I met Gregory during my senior year at Portland State University, where I was completing degrees in business administration and information systems, while working part-time at a consulting firm that specialized in operational efficiency for small businesses. Gregory was pursuing an MBA that he would never complete, and working in his family's investment management firm in a position that had been created specifically for him. Gregory was charming, well-connected, and genuinely interested in my academic work and career ambitions. He spoke enthusiastically about building businesses, creating value, and contributing to economic development in ways that suggested real understanding of entrepreneurship and strategic thinking. Our early conversations convinced me that he shared my values about work, competence, and meaningful contribution. What I failed to recognize was that Gregory's enthusiasm was theoretical rather than practical. He enjoyed discussing business strategy, but had never been responsible for implementing strategies or dealing with the consequences when implementations failed. He understood financial concepts, but had never been personally accountable for generating revenue or managing expenses with his own resources at risk. The disconnect between Gregory's theoretical knowledge and practical inexperience became apparent during our first major financial decision as a couple. Gregory wanted to invest in a restaurant concept that he was convinced would revolutionize casual dining in the Portland market. The business plan was impressive, the location was excellent, and the initial projections suggested substantial returns on investment. But Gregory's analysis was based entirely on optimistic assumptions about customer demand, operational efficiency, and competitive positioning. He had never worked in food service, managed restaurant operations, or been personally responsible for the thousands of daily decisions that determine whether restaurants succeed or fail. Carmen's influence became apparent in my approach to evaluating the investment opportunity. Rather than focusing only on financial projections and market analysis, I insisted on spending time in comparable restaurants during different shifts, interviewing customers about their dining preferences, researching vendor relationships and supply chain challenges, and understanding the regulatory requirements that would affect operations. My research revealed problems that Gregory's analysis had overlooked. The target customer demographic was already well served by existing establishments. The location's rent structure would require sales volumes that seemed unrealistic based on comparable restaurants in similar areas. The proposed menu would require skilled kitchen staff whose availability and wage expectations weren't reflected in the financial projections. Gregory was frustrated by my methodical approach to due diligence. He interpreted my questions and research as lack of confidence in his business judgment rather than prudent evaluation of risks and opportunities. When I recommended against the investment, he accused me of being overly conservative and missing the bigger picture of entrepreneurial opportunity. The restaurant opened 8 months later without our investment and closed within 14 months due to exactly the problems my research had identified: insufficient customer demand, higher than projected operational costs, and management challenges that the founders had underestimated. Gregory never acknowledged that my analysis had been accurate, but he also never again criticized my approach to evaluating business opportunities. This pattern would repeat throughout our relationship. Gregory would propose initiatives based on theoretical analysis and optimistic assumptions. I would conduct practical research and identify implementation challenges, and we would proceed with modified plans that addressed the concerns I had identified. Gregory received credit for strategic vision, while my contributions were categorized as technical support or administrative assistance. The pattern established precedents that would later extend to our family dynamics and ultimately create the conditions that led to the confrontation at the Riverside Country Club. Patricia represented a different but equally problematic approach to work and contribution. She had grown up in a family where social status was maintained through charitable activities, cultural patronage, and community leadership roles that required significant time commitments but generated no direct income. Patricia was genuinely committed to causes she supported, But her approach to charitable work focused more on recognition and social positioning than on measurable outcomes for the people or organizations she was supposedly helping. Patricia's charitable activities followed a predictable pattern: identify prestigious organizations where board membership would enhance social connections, volunteer for highly visible roles that would generate public recognition, and delegate actual work to paid staff or volunteers, whose contributions would rarely be acknowledged publicly. This approach to charitable involvement was most apparent in Patricia's role with the Portland Children's Arts Foundation, where she served as board chair for 6 years, while I handled grant writing, program coordination, vendor management, and outcome evaluation. Patricia attended board meetings, represented the organization at fundraising events, and gave interviews to local media about the foundation's mission and impact. The work that actually delivered services to children and families was performed by people whose names never appeared in newspaper articles or fundraising materials. Grant applications were researched and written by consultants like me. Educational programs were designed and delivered by teaching artists who worked for modest compensation and little recognition. Administrative support was provided by part-time staff members who managed complex logistics while receiving minimal credit for their contributions. Patricia genuinely believed that her board leadership and public representation were the most important contributions to the foundation's success. She invested significant time in attending meetings, reviewing strategic plans, and participating in fundraising activities. But she had limited understanding of or appreciation for the operational work that translated strategic plans into actual services for children and families. This blind spot about operational contributions became the template for how our family approached collaborative projects. Patricia and Gregory focused on what they considered strategic leadership, while delegating implementation work to people whose contributions were consistently undervalued or overlooked entirely. The foundation I had absorbed from Carmen about the dignity and essential nature of all forms of work made it difficult to accept this diminished role, but family loyalty and conflict avoidance initially prevented me from challenging the dynamic directly. Instead, I concentrated on performing my responsibilities excellently while hoping that consistent results would eventually lead to appropriate recognition and respect. This hope would prove to be naive, but the competence I developed through years of unacknowledged work would ultimately become the platform for building something entirely my own. The most important lesson from my early years was understanding that work has intrinsic value, regardless of whether that value is recognized by others. Carmen had demonstrated this principle through decades of essential contributions to a successful business, even when customers and family members failed to understand or appreciate her role. Miguel had reinforced the lesson by consistently acknowledging Carmen's contributions and ensuring that others understood her essential role in their shared success. Their partnership provided a model for how collaborative work could function when both parties understood and respected each other's expertise. But I had also learned that not everyone approaches work relationships with the same commitment to mutual recognition and respect. Some people are comfortable taking credit for outcomes they didn't create and minimizing contributions from people whose work makes their success possible. The challenge was learning to distinguish between people who temporarily overlooked contributions due to lack of understanding and people who systematically exploited others, work while claiming credit for themselves. Carmen had taught me to address misunderstandings directly and professionally, but she had also taught me to recognize when people were committed to maintaining exploitative relationships rather than correcting misunderstandings. Mija, she told me during my college years, some people will always need someone else to do the work they cannot or will not do themselves. There is nothing wrong with doing that work if you are respected and compensated appropriately. But never let anyone convince you that doing essential work makes you less important than the people who benefit from your work. The foundation she had built in my understanding of work, competence, and self-respect would prove crucial during the most challenging period of my life. When I finally recognized that my family relationships were built on systematic exploitation rather than mutual respect, I had the tools and confidence needed to walk away and build something better. But first, I would have to survive the collapse of everything I had built, while trying to earn recognition from people who were fundamentally incapable of providing it. The path forward would require applying Carmen's lessons about dignity and self-worth in situations she could never have anticipated, but her foundational teachings would prove remarkably adaptable to circumstances far beyond the world of automotive repair and small business management. The woman who walked out of the Riverside Country Club that March evening carried with her 23 years of lessons about work, value, and self-respect. Those lessons had been tested through a decade of marriage and family relationships that consistently undervalued her contributions. But they had never been abandoned entirely. The transformation ahead would require rediscovering the strength and clarity that Carmen had modeled, applying those qualities in contexts that demanded unprecedented courage, and ultimately building a life that honored the dignity and essential nature of meaningful work. The foundation of Rodriguez Strategic Consulting began not with a business plan or startup capital, but with a conversation that lasted until 3 a.m. in the cramped kitchen of my studio apartment in Southeast Portland. I was 24 years old, recently graduated with dual degrees in business administration and information systems, and facing the kind of career decision that determines whether someone builds something meaningful or simply accepts whatever opportunities others provide. The conversation was with Carmen, my grandmother, who had driven across town through a winter storm because she sensed I was struggling with uncertainty about my professional future. The corporate recruitment process had yielded several attractive offers from established consulting firms, technology companies, and financial services organizations. Each position promised excellent compensation, comprehensive benefits, and clear advancement trajectories within structured organizational hierarchies. But something fundamental felt wrong about accepting predetermined paths that other people had designed for their own purposes and priorities. The positions required conformity to existing methodologies, adherence to corporate cultures that prioritized billable hours over meaningful outcomes, and acceptance of client relationships that were managed by senior partners rather than built through direct trust and demonstrated competence. Carmen listened without interruption while I explained my reservations about traditional employment opportunities. She understood intuitively that my concerns were not about financial security or professional advancement, but about maintaining the integrity and independence that had been central to her own approach to building meaningful work. "Misha," she said finally, settling back in the kitchen chair that had become her designated spot during our regular evening conversations, "tell me what kind of work would make you proud to explain to your children someday." The question cut through months of uncertainty and revealed the clarity I had been avoiding. I wanted to build relationships with business owners who faced real challenges that affected their employees, customers, and communities. I wanted to develop solutions that addressed actual problems rather than implementing impressive technologies that generated consulting fees without creating measurable value. I wanted to be accountable for outcomes rather than just delivering recommendations that other people would be responsible for implementing. Most importantly, I wanted to work with people who valued competence, integrity, and results over credentials, connections, and presentation skills. The corporate positions offered security and conventional success, but they also required accepting environments where political navigation was often more important than technical excellence. "I want to help business owners solve problems that matter to them," I said, articulating something I had understood intuitively but never expressed clearly. "I want to work with people who appreciate competent analysis and practical solutions. I want to be responsible for results rather than just producing reports that other people use to make decisions." Carmen smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose guidance had helped clarify rather than influence a decision. "Then you need to build something that allows you to work that way. But you also need to understand that building something requires different skills than working for someone else." What followed was a comprehensive education in entrepreneurship that no business school could have provided. Carmen had spent 37 years building and operating Rodriguez Auto Repair alongside my grandfather Miguel, navigating challenges that ranged from economic recessions to regulatory changes to technological disruptions that transformed the automotive service industry. Her experience had taught her that successful independent businesses required mastery of capabilities that employees could delegate to other departments or specialists. Marketing, financial management, operational planning, customer relationship management, vendor negotiations, regulatory compliance, and strategic decision-making all became personal responsibilities when someone chose to build rather than join existing organizations. The advantage of working for yourself is that you can choose your clients, your methods, and your priorities, Carmen explained during our late-night planning sessions. The disadvantage is that every decision becomes your responsibility, every mistake affects your reputation, and every success depends entirely on your own competence and effort. Quote, "The education began with fundamental questions about business model design and market positioning. What specific services would I provide? Which industries and business types would I focus on? How would I differentiate my approach from established competitors? What would I charge for my services? How would I find clients and build sustainable relationships?" Carmen's methodology for exploring these questions was characteristically practical and thorough. Rather than beginning with theoretical frameworks or aspirational statements, she insisted that I start by understanding real market demand through direct conversation with potential clients about their actual challenges and existing relationships with service providers. This research phase consumed 3 months of evenings and weekends while I completed my final semester of graduate coursework. I conducted informal interviews with owners of small and medium-sized businesses across multiple industries, asking about their operational challenges, their experiences with consultants and service providers, and their perspectives on what kinds of assistance would be most valuable. The research revealed opportunities that I had not anticipated when considering traditional consulting career paths. Many business owners were frustrated with service providers who offered standardized solutions that required expensive customization to address specific operational requirements. They wanted consultants who would invest time in understanding their unique circumstances, rather than applying template methodologies that worked adequately for generic situations. More importantly, many business owners had been disappointed by consultants who delivered impressive presentations and detailed recommendations, but provided minimal support during implementation phases when real challenges emerged. They wanted partners who would remain engaged through the difficult work of translating strategic plans into operational improvements. The market research also identified a significant gap in services available to businesses that were too small for major consulting firms, but too complex for basic bookkeeping or administrative support services. These companies needed strategic analysis, operational optimization, and technology integration support, but they required service delivery models that were more flexible and cost-effective than traditional consulting approaches. Armed with this market intelligence, I developed a business model that addressed the specific needs and preferences I had identified through direct customer research. Rodriguez Strategic Consulting would focus exclusively on small and medium-sized businesses with annual revenues between $2 million and $20 million. These companies were large enough to benefit from sophisticated analytical work, but small enough to value personal relationships and customized service delivery. The service methodology would emphasize collaborative problem-solving rather than expert consultation. Instead of conducting analysis in isolation and delivering recommendations for client implementation, I would work directly with business owners and their teams to understand challenges, develop solutions, and support implementation until desired outcomes were achieved. Pricing would be based on project outcomes and measurable results, rather than hourly billing or retainer fees. This approach aligned my compensation with client success, while providing cost predictability that small business owners required for budgeting and financial planning purposes. Most importantly, the business would prioritize long-term client relationships over short-term revenue maximization. Success would be measured by client retention, referral generation, and measurable improvements in client business performance rather than by billable hours or project volume metrics. Carmen reviewed this business plan with the same systematic attention she had applied to evaluating major equipment purchases or facility expansion decisions for Rodriguez Auto Repair. She identified potential risks, questioned assumptions about market demand and competitive positioning, and challenged projections that seemed overly optimistic or insufficiently supported by research data. Her most important contribution was insisting that I develop detailed financial projections that accounted for the irregular income patterns that characterize consulting businesses. Unlike traditional employment, consulting revenue could vary dramatically between months depending on project timing, seasonal business cycles, and economic conditions that affected client spending on professional services. You need enough savings to cover at least 12 months of personal expenses plus business operating costs, she advised. Consulting income is unpredictable, especially during the first 2 years while you build reputation and client relationships. Many good consultants fail because they underestimate the financial requirements for surviving a regular cash flow. This guidance proved crucial during the early months of building Rodriguez Strategic Consulting, when project timing was unpredictable, and client payments were often delayed due to their own cash flow challenges or administrative processing delays. Carmen also helped me understand the psychological demands of independent business ownership that extended beyond technical competence and market knowledge. Working independently required tolerance for uncertainty, comfort with personal accountability, and resilience during periods when results did not match expectations or efforts. Some people are more successful working for others because they need structure, regular feedback, and shared responsibility for outcomes, she observed. There is nothing wrong with preferring that kind of work environment, but if you choose to work independently, you need to be comfortable making decisions without consensus, learning from mistakes without external support, and maintaining motivation during difficult periods when no one else is responsible for encouraging you. The transition from graduate student to independent consultant began with securing my first client before officially launching Rodriguez Strategic Consulting. This approach provided essential validation of the business model while generating immediate revenue that would support early operating expenses and marketing activities. The client was Pacific Basin Manufacturing, a family-owned company that produced specialized industrial equipment for the maritime shipping industry. The company had been profitable for over 40 years, but was facing competitive pressure from larger manufacturers who were leveraging advanced technology and economies of scale to offer similar products at lower prices. The owner, Robert Chen, had been referred to me through a mutual connection who was aware of my graduate research on operational efficiency and technology integration for manufacturing businesses. Robert was skeptical about hiring a consultant with limited professional experience. But he was also frustrated with recommendations he had received from established consulting firms that seemed to misunderstand the unique requirements of his specialized market niche. Our initial meeting lasted 4 hours and covered every aspect of Pacific Basin manufacturing operations, from supply chain management to customer service delivery. Robert was testing my understanding of manufacturing processes, market dynamics, and the practical challenges that small manufacturers faced when competing against larger organizations with superior resources. The conversation revealed that Robert's primary concerns were not strategic or financial, but operational. His existing production processes were efficient for current volume levels, but they would not scale effectively if demand increased significantly. His customer relationships were strong, but they were dependent on personal connections that would be difficult to transfer to other team members as the business grew. Most importantly, Robert was concerned about maintaining quality standards and customer service levels that differentiated Pacific Basin Manufacturing from competitors who were prioritizing cost reduction over product excellence and relationship management. Rather than proposing comprehensive strategic restructuring or expensive technology implementations, I suggested a focused project that would address his most immediate operational challenges while providing a foundation for sustainable growth. The project would involve systematic analysis of current production workflows, identification of scalability constraints, and development of process improvements that would increase capacity without compromising quality standards. The proposal included detailed project timelines, specific deliverables, and performance metrics that would allow both parties to evaluate project success objectively. Most importantly, the proposal included my commitment to remaining engaged throughout implementation phases until desired improvements were fully operational and producing measurable results. Robert agreed to a 3-month pilot project that would serve as a mutual evaluation of working relationship compatibility and service delivery effectiveness. The project scope was limited enough to minimize his financial risk, while providing sufficient opportunity for me to demonstrate competence and value creation. The Pacific Basin Manufacturing Project became the template for Rodriguez Strategic Consulting service delivery methodology and client relationship management approach. Every subsequent client engagement would be structured around similar principles of collaborative problem-solving, outcome-based compensation, and long-term partnership, rather than transactional service delivery. The project results exceeded both parties' expectations. Production capacity increased by 34%, without additional staffing or equipment investments. Quality metrics improved across all product categories. Customer satisfaction scores reached historical highs due to reduced delivery times and enhanced communication during production phases. More importantly, the operational improvements created a foundation for sustainable growth that would support Pacific Basin manufacturing expansion into new market segments over the following several years. Robert became not only a satisfied client, but also an active advocate who referred Rodriguez Strategic Consulting to other business owners facing similar operational challenges. These referrals provided the client base that supported business growth during the crucial early years when reputation and track record were being established. The success with Pacific Basin Manufacturing validated the business model and service delivery approach that would define Rodriguez Strategic Consulting for the next 8 years. More importantly, it demonstrated that the market demand identified through preliminary research was real and substantial enough to support a profitable consulting practice. But perhaps most significantly, the project proved that Carmen's lessons about competence, integrity, and client-focused service delivery could be translated into a sustainable business model that provided both professional fulfillment and financial security. The foundation built during these early years would prove essential when family relationships tested my commitment to these principles and ultimately forced me to choose between maintaining exploitative relationships and preserving the integrity that had made professional success possible. The woman who walked out of the Riverside Country Club that March evening carried with her 8 years of experience building something meaningful from nothing, serving clients who valued competence and results, and creating value through work that generated both professional respect and personal satisfaction. That foundation would sustain me through the challenging period ahead, when I would need to rebuild not just professional relationships, but fundamental understanding of how to invest time and energy in people and projects that honored, rather than exploited, my contributions. By the 4th year of Rodriguez Strategic Consulting, the business had evolved from a promising startup into a recognized presence in the Pacific Northwest consulting market. The client roster had expanded to include 23 companies across manufacturing, healthcare, professional services, and technology sectors. Annual revenue had reached $420,000, with profit margins that exceeded 70% due to the efficient service delivery model and outcome-based pricing structure. More importantly, the business had achieved something that many consulting firms struggled to maintain: genuine client loyalty based on measurable results, rather than relationship management or competitive pricing. 18 of the original clients continued to engage Rodriguez Strategic Consulting for ongoing projects, and client referrals generated over 80% of new business opportunities. The recognition extended beyond financial metrics to industry acknowledgement and professional respect. The Portland Business Journal had featured Rodriguez Strategic Consulting in their annual Emerging Companies to Watch profile, highlighting the innovative approach to small business consulting and the measurable outcomes achieved for clients across diverse industries. The Oregon Small Business Development Center had invited me to present workshops on operational optimization and strategic planning for their statewide conference, reaching an audience of over 300 business owners and economic development professionals. These presentations led to consulting opportunities in markets outside the Portland metropolitan area and established credibility within the broader business support ecosystem. Professional recognition also came through academic channels, when Portland State University's School of Business Administration invited me to serve as a guest lecturer for their graduate-level course on entrepreneurship and small business management. The opportunity to share real-world experience with emerging business professionals provided intellectual stimulation while reinforcing my commitment to practical, results-oriented business consulting. The success created opportunities that would have seemed impossible during the early months of building Rodriguez Strategic Consulting from nothing. The National Association of Business Consultants extended membership despite my relatively brief professional history, recognizing the innovative methodologies and client outcomes that differentiated my approach from traditional consulting models. More significantly, several established consulting firms approached me with partnership proposals and acquisition offers. The discussions revealed that larger organizations were interested in accessing both my client relationships and the service delivery methodologies that had generated consistent results across diverse industries and business challenges. The acquisition offers were financially attractive and would have provided immediate access to resources, capabilities, and market reach that would take years to develop independently. The partnership proposals offered collaboration with experienced professionals who could accelerate business growth while maintaining operational independence and client relationship control. Yet something fundamental about these opportunities felt inconsistent with the principles that had made Rodriguez Strategic Consulting successful. The larger firms were primarily interested in scaling my methodologies to serve their existing client base, rather than extending my client-focused approach to broader markets. They viewed my business model as a product to be replicated rather than a philosophy to be embraced. The conversations revealed fundamental differences in how we understood the purpose and value of business consulting. The established firms prioritized efficiency, scalability, and profit maximization. They measured success through billable hours, project volume, and revenue per consultant metrics that incentivized quantity over quality outcomes. Rodriguez Strategic Consulting had been built on different priorities: client relationship depth, measurable business improvement, and sustainable problem-solving that created long-term value rather than generating recurring consulting dependencies. These principles were not easily compatible with organizational cultures that emphasized growth metrics over client satisfaction measures. The decision to decline acquisition offers and partnership proposals was influenced significantly by conversations with existing clients about their experiences with other consulting relationships. Many had previously worked with larger firms and had been disappointed by standardized approaches that failed to address their specific operational challenges and market circumstances. Robert Chen from Pacific Basin Manufacturing articulated the distinction clearly during one of our quarterly strategic planning sessions. The difference between working with you and working with the big consulting firms is that you understand our business well enough to identify problems we did not know we had, while they try to solve problems we do not actually have using methods that worked for completely different companies. This feedback reinforced my commitment to maintaining the client-focused methodology that had generated consistent results, even if it meant accepting slower business growth and limited market expansion compared to what would be possible through partnership with larger organizations. The success of Rodriguez Strategic Consulting also created personal financial security that had been uncertain during the early years of business development. The irregular income patterns that characterize consulting work had stabilized into predictable revenue streams supported by long-term client relationships and consistent referral generation. This financial stability provided freedom to be selective about project opportunities and client relationships. Rather than accepting every potential engagement to maximize revenue, I could focus on projects that aligned with my expertise and offered genuine potential for meaningful business improvement. The selectivity enhanced both service quality and professional satisfaction. Working exclusively with clients who valued competence and results created a positive reinforcement cycle that attracted similar clients, while discouraging relationships that would have drained time and energy without producing satisfactory outcomes for either party. Financial security also provided resources for investing in professional development activities that enhanced service capabilities and market knowledge. Advanced training in organizational psychology, technology integration, and industry-specific operational challenges expanded the range of problems I could address effectively, while maintaining the depth of expertise that clients expected. The business success created a platform for community involvement and professional contribution that extended beyond individual client relationships. Serving on the advisory board for the Portland Women's Business Center provided opportunities to mentor emerging entrepreneurs while contributing to economic development initiatives that supported business creation and growth throughout the region. Participation in industry conferences and professional associations expanded my network while creating opportunities to share knowledge and experience with peers facing similar challenges in building successful consulting practices. These relationships provided both professional support and intellectual stimulation that enhanced the quality of services delivered to clients. The recognition and success, however, created an unexpected challenge in family relationships. While Rodriguez Strategic Consulting was generating industry recognition and financial success, Gregory and Patricia remained skeptical about the sustainability and significance of independent consulting work compared to traditional corporate employment or involvement in their established investment and philanthropic activities. Their skepticism was not based on financial performance or professional recognition, both of which were demonstrably successful by objective measures. Rather, their concerns reflected fundamental differences in how we understood the purpose and value of professional work. Gregory and Patricia valued work that enhanced social status, provided networking opportunities with influential people, and created platforms for community recognition and leadership roles. They measured professional success through organizational titles, association memberships, and social connections, rather than through client satisfaction, measurable outcomes, or financial performance. From their perspective, Rodriguez Strategic Consulting was impressive as a small business achievement, but limited in its potential for generating the kind of social capital and community influence that they considered most important for long-term success and personal fulfillment. These different priorities became apparent during family gatherings where professional accomplishments were discussed. Gregory and Patricia would acknowledge my business success politely but briefly before transitioning to more detailed conversations about Caroline's artistic achievements, their charitable activities, or social events that provided opportunities for networking with community leaders and business executives. The pattern established a hierarchy of recognition where professional work was valued primarily for its social implications rather than its intrinsic merit or contribution to economic development and business improvement. Rodriguez Strategic Consulting generated income and achieved industry recognition, but it did not provide access to the social circles and cultural institutions that Gregory and Patricia considered most significant. This dynamic became more pronounced as my business success enabled financial independence that reduced my reliance on family financial support or approval. The autonomy created space for making decisions based on my own priorities and values rather than seeking validation or avoiding conflict with family expectations. The independence was liberating professionally but complicated personally. Family relationships that had been built around shared activities and mutual dependence began shifting, as I required less support while contributing more resources to collaborative projects and family initiatives. Gregory and Patricia began requesting assistance with investment analysis, property management, and charitable foundation administration during the same period that they were questioning the long-term viability and significance of my professional work. The irony was not lost on me, but addressing it directly seemed likely to create unnecessary conflict without resolving underlying issues about recognition and respect. Instead, I focused on demonstrating competence and reliability through consistent performance on family projects, while building Rodriguez Strategic Consulting into a business that could sustain both professional satisfaction and financial security regardless of external validation or approval. This approach worked effectively for maintaining family harmony while pursuing professional goals, but it also established patterns of unacknowledged contribution and exploited expertise that would become increasingly problematic over time. The success of Rodriguez Strategic Consulting provided evidence that my approach to work, client relationships, and value creation could generate both professional recognition and financial success. The business had grown from nothing into a sustainable enterprise that created measurable value for clients while providing personal fulfillment and economic security. Yet the professional success did not translate into family recognition or respect for my contributions to collaborative projects. If anything, the business success seemed to increase expectations for my involvement in family initiatives, while decreasing acknowledgement of the expertise and effort I contributed to those activities. The disconnect between professional recognition and personal appreciation created cognitive dissonance that would eventually require resolution through direct confrontation or relationship restructuring. The competence and confidence I had developed through building a successful business provided the foundation for recognizing and addressing family dynamics that were fundamentally exploitative rather than collaborative. The woman who had built Rodriguez Strategic Consulting from nothing understood the difference between relationships based on mutual respect and relationships based on convenient exploitation. Professional experience with clients had taught me to recognize and avoid working relationships that undervalued contributions or failed to provide appropriate recognition for results achieved. The same principles that had made Rodriguez Strategic Consulting successful would eventually need to be applied to family relationships that were structured around similar patterns of unacknowledged contribution and exploited expertise. The business success had provided financial independence, professional recognition, and personal confidence that would prove essential when family dynamics finally required the kind of direct confrontation that I had been avoiding through years of patient contribution and diplomatic conflict avoidance. The foundation was in place, the skills had been developed, the evidence was documented. What remained was the courage to apply professional standards to personal relationships, and the willingness to accept whatever consequences resulted from demanding the same respect and recognition in family contexts that I routinely received in business relationships. The invitation arrived on embossed letterhead that carried the subtle weight of institutional prestige and established authority. The Whitmore Foundation, founded by Gregory's grandfather in 1967, was seeking a strategic planning consultant to evaluate current programs, assess operational efficiency, and develop recommendations for expanding their charitable giving portfolio over the next decade. The timing was significant. Rodriguez Strategic Consulting had reached a natural plateau in terms of individual client capacity, and I had been considering opportunities to leverage my expertise in organizational analysis toward larger projects that could create broader community impact while maintaining the client-focused methodology that had generated consistent success. The foundation represented exactly the kind of challenge that appealed to my professional interests: a well-established organization with substantial resources, clear mission alignment, and genuine potential for measurable community benefit. The scope involved comprehensive program evaluation, stakeholder analysis, grant-making optimization, and strategic planning that would utilize every capability I had developed over 6 years of consulting experience. More importantly, the project offered an opportunity to contribute meaningfully to charitable initiatives that addressed education access, workforce development, and small business support throughout the Pacific Northwest. The Foundation's grant portfolio included programs that had created scholarships for first-generation college students, funded mentorship initiatives for emerging entrepreneurs, and supported workforce training programs that provided career pathways for people facing economic transitions. Working with the Whitmore Foundation would represent a significant expansion of my professional impact while aligning with personal values about community contribution and economic development that had influenced my decision to focus Rodriguez Strategic Consulting on small business support and operational improvement. The proposal process required extensive documentation of consulting methodology, relevant experience, and strategic recommendations for addressing the specific challenges facing charitable organizations in an evolving philanthropic landscape. The competition included several established consulting firms with impressive credentials and substantial experience in nonprofit strategic planning. Yet my proposal emphasized capabilities that larger firms might not prioritize: deep understanding of small business operations that would inform workforce development programs, practical experience with financial analysis that would enhance grant evaluation processes, and commitment to outcome measurement that would demonstrate program effectiveness to both donors and beneficiaries. The presentation to the Foundation Board took place in the conference room of the downtown Portland office building that housed the Whitmore Family Investment Management firm. The room itself conveyed institutional permanence through rich wood paneling, original artwork, and furnishings that suggested both prosperity and conservative good taste. The board members represented exactly the kind of community leadership that I had observed from a distance through various professional networking events and charitable functions. These were individuals whose names appeared regularly in newspaper social pages, whose children attended exclusive private schools, and whose charitable activities generated the kind of public recognition that enhanced social status while supporting worthy causes. Patricia served as board chair and managed the presentation process with the polished competence that characterized her approach to organizational leadership roles. She introduced my background and consulting experience with appropriate enthusiasm, while maintaining the professional tone that such formal proceedings required. Gregory participated as treasurer and strategic planning committee chair, contributing analysis of financial performance and operational metrics that demonstrated his theoretical understanding of nonprofit management principles. His comments revealed familiarity with industry best practices and current trends in philanthropic strategy development. The other board members included retired executives from major Portland corporations, established legal and financial professionals, and community leaders whose involvement provided both expertise and social credibility to the Foundation's activities and grant-making decisions. The presentation proceeded smoothly through analysis of current program effectiveness, identification of expansion opportunities, and recommendations for operational improvements that would enhance both efficiency and community impact. My strategic recommendations emphasized measurable outcomes, stakeholder engagement, and sustainable program development that would create lasting benefit rather than temporary assistance. The board's questions revealed genuine engagement with the substance of my recommendations and appreciation for the analytical rigor that supported my strategic proposals. Several members commented favorably on my understanding of small business challenges and workforce development needs that aligned with their priority funding areas. More significantly, the discussion revealed shared values about the importance of supporting economic opportunity, educational access, and community development through strategic charitable giving that leveraged resources effectively while maintaining accountability to both donors and program beneficiaries. The project approval was unanimous, with implementation beginning immediately and completion scheduled over an 8-month timeline that would accommodate thorough stakeholder consultation, comprehensive program evaluation, and detailed strategic planning that addressed both immediate operational improvements and long-term expansion possibilities. The engagement represented the most significant project in Rodriguez strategic consulting history in terms of scope, duration, and potential community impact. The financial compensation was substantial, but more importantly, the project provided an opportunity to apply consulting expertise toward charitable initiatives that could create meaningful difference in the lives of scholarship recipients, program participants, and small business owners throughout the region. The early phases of the project exceeded expectations in terms of both working relationship quality and preliminary findings about program effectiveness and expansion potential. The Foundation staff members were knowledgeable, collaborative, and genuinely committed to maximizing the impact of their grant-making activities. Patricia proved to be an effective project champion who understood both the strategic importance of the evaluation process and the operational requirements for successful implementation. She facilitated access to program data, coordinated stakeholder interviews, and provided institutional knowledge that enhanced my understanding of historical context and decision-making precedents. Gregory contributed financial analysis and strategic perspective that complemented my operational focus, while ensuring that recommendations would be practical and sustainable given the Foundation's resource constraints and funding priorities. His involvement demonstrated genuine engagement with the substance of Foundation activities rather than merely ceremonial board participation. The collaboration felt natural and productive in ways that validated my decision to accept the project, despite its potential for creating complications in family relationships. Professional work was proceeding according to established consulting protocols, while personal relationships remained appropriately separate from business interactions. The Foundation's current programs demonstrated impressive results in terms of measurable outcomes and beneficiary satisfaction. Scholarship recipients were completing degree programs at rates that exceeded national averages for first-generation college students. Workforce development initiatives were placing participants in career track positions with compensation levels that provided economic stability and advancement opportunities. Small business mentorship programs had supported the creation of over 40 new enterprises during the previous 5 years, generating employment opportunities while contributing to local economic development and community vitalization efforts. Yet the program evaluation also revealed opportunities for enhanced effectiveness through improved coordination between related initiatives, expanded partnerships with complementary organizations, and strategic program modifications that would increase both reach and impact without proportional increases in administrative overhead. My recommendations emphasized leveraging existing program strengths while addressing identified gaps through strategic partnerships, technology integration, and outcome measurement systems that would demonstrate program effectiveness to potential donors and funding partners. The preliminary report generated enthusiasm from both board members and Foundation staff, who recognized the potential for implementing improvements that would enhance their ability to create meaningful community impact while maintaining fiscal responsibility and operational efficiency. The positive response to preliminary findings created momentum for deeper collaboration that extended beyond the original project scope. Patricia suggested that ongoing strategic planning support could help the Foundation navigate implementation challenges while ensuring that recommended improvements achieved desired outcomes. Gregory proposed expanding my involvement to include grant evaluation processes and donor relationship management that would benefit from the analytical capabilities and business experience that had generated successful recommendations during the initial strategic planning phase. The Foundation staff expressed interest in developing long-term consulting relationships that would provide continuous improvement support while maintaining the fresh perspective that external analysis could offer to organizational development and program optimization efforts. These expansion opportunities represented exactly the kind of professional growth that I had envisioned when considering how Rodriguez Strategic Consulting could evolve beyond individual client relationships toward larger projects with broader community impact and enhanced professional satisfaction. Working with the Whitmore Foundation provided intellectual stimulation, meaningful purpose, and financial compensation that exceeded what would be possible through expansion of traditional small business consulting activities. The strategic planning challenges were complex enough to utilize my full range of capabilities, while creating opportunities for professional development and expertise enhancement. More importantly, the foundation work aligned with personal values about community contribution and economic development that had influenced my original decision to focus consulting services on small business support and operational improvement initiatives. The collaboration also provided opportunities for deeper professional relationships with Gregory and Patricia that were based on mutual respect, shared objectives, and recognition of complementary expertise, rather than family obligations or social expectations. For the first time in our relationship, I was working with them as peers, rather than as someone whose contributions were taken for granted or whose expertise was valued primarily for its utility in supporting their priorities and initiatives. The professional dynamic created space for authentic collaboration, where my analytical capabilities, strategic recommendations, and implementation support were recognized as essential contributions to shared success rather than administrative assistance or technical support that could be provided by anyone with similar skills. The Foundation project established precedents for working relationships that honored expertise, valued contributions appropriately, and maintained clear boundaries between professional collaboration and personal relationships. The success created possibilities for expanded involvement that could provide both professional growth and meaningful community impact. Yet the positive working relationship also created expectations for continued involvement that would test my commitment to maintaining those professional boundaries when family dynamics inevitably complicated collaborative processes. The Foundation represented an opportunity to contribute meaningfully to charitable initiatives that mattered to me personally while working with people who understood and appreciated my professional capabilities. But it also represented potential entanglement in family business activities that could compromise the independence and objectivity that had made Rodriguez Strategic Consulting successful. The challenge would be determining whether the professional collaboration could be sustained without sacrificing the principles and boundaries that had enabled both business success and personal satisfaction during 6 years of independent consulting work. The temptation was significant: meaningful work, substantial compensation, professional recognition, and collaborative relationships with people whose values seemed to align with my own priorities and community commitment. But the Foundation project would also test whether family relationships could support genuine professional partnerships, or whether they would inevitably revert to the patterns of unacknowledged contribution and exploited expertise that had characterized previous collaborative efforts. The next phase of the Foundation engagement would reveal whether this opportunity represented genuine professional growth, or simply a more sophisticated version of the same dynamics that had made family collaboration problematic in the past. The third month of the Whitmore Foundation project delivered results that exceeded everyone's expectations and temporarily validated my decision to blur the boundaries between professional consulting and family collaboration. The comprehensive program evaluation had identified strategic opportunities that could increase the Foundation's community impact by 47%, while reducing administrative overhead through improved operational efficiency and enhanced partnership coordination. The findings were particularly compelling in the area of workforce development programming, where my analysis had revealed significant gaps between training initiatives and actual employment opportunities available in the regional job market. The Foundation had been funding excellent educational programs that prepared participants with valuable skills, but those skills weren't always aligned with positions that local employers were actively seeking to fill. My recommendation involved restructuring the workforce development approach around direct partnerships with employers who would commit to hiring program graduates, ensuring that training investments would translate directly into career opportunities, rather than simply enhancing participant qualifications without addressing market demand realities. The employer partnership strategy required extensive research into regional hiring trends, detailed analysis of skill requirements across different industries, and comprehensive outreach to business leaders who could provide both guidance on training priorities and commitment to employment opportunities for successful program participants. This research leveraged capabilities I had developed through 6 years of consulting work with small and medium-sized businesses, providing insights into employer perspectives and hiring challenges that traditional nonprofit strategic planning consultants might not possess. The combination of charitable program expertise from foundation staff and business operations knowledge from my consulting background created synergies that enhanced the quality of strategic recommendations while ensuring practical implementation feasibility. Patricia coordinated stakeholder engagement with characteristic efficiency and diplomatic skill, facilitating conversations with community leaders, program participants, and potential employer partners that provided essential input for strategic planning decisions. Her understanding of local nonprofit networks and established relationships with community organizations created access to perspectives and information that would have taken months to develop through independent outreach efforts. Gregory contributed financial analysis and resource allocation modeling that demonstrated how proposed program modifications could be implemented within existing budget constraints, while generating measurable improvements in participant outcomes and community impact. His analytical approach complemented my operational focus while ensuring that strategic recommendations would be sustainable given the Foundation's funding priorities and long-term financial planning requirements. The collaboration felt genuinely productive in ways that honored each contributor's expertise while creating outcomes that exceeded what any individual could have achieved independently. Professional boundaries remained clear, roles were well-defined, and mutual respect characterized working relationships that maintained appropriate separation between family dynamics and business collaboration. The preliminary presentation to the full board generated enthusiasm and unanimous approval for implementation of the recommended strategic modifications. Board members expressed particular appreciation for the analytical rigor and practical orientation that characterized the recommendations, noting that previous strategic planning initiatives had often produced impressive reports without providing sufficient guidance for actual implementation. Several board members commented favorably on the collaborative approach that had integrated multiple perspectives, while maintaining focus on measurable outcomes and accountability to both program participants and charitable donors. The methodology demonstrated how effective nonprofit strategic planning could combine mission alignment with business discipline to create sustainable improvement in community impact. The success led to immediate expansion of project scope to include implementation support, ongoing program evaluation, and strategic planning for additional Foundation initiatives that could benefit from similar analytical approaches and operational optimization. The board approved a comprehensive engagement that would extend the consulting relationship through the following year, while providing substantial compensation that reflected both the value created and the expanded scope of responsibility. This expansion represented exactly the kind of professional growth opportunity that had motivated my original decision to accept the Foundation project. The work was intellectually stimulating, financially rewarding, and aligned with personal values about community contribution and economic development that had influenced my career choices since establishing Rodriguez Strategic Consulting. More importantly, the expanded engagement provided opportunities for continued professional collaboration with Gregory and Patricia in contexts that honored expertise while maintaining appropriate boundaries between business relationships and family dynamics. The success created precedents for working together as peers rather than family members. With complicated histories of unacknowledged contribution and exploited expertise, the implementation phase proceeded smoothly through the first quarter, with workforce development program modifications generating immediate improvements in participant placement rates and employer satisfaction with graduate preparation levels. The partnership approach had created accountability mechanisms that ensured training investments would translate directly into career opportunities, while providing employers with access to motivated, well-prepared candidates for positions that had been difficult to fill through traditional recruiting methods. Program participants responded positively to curriculum modifications that aligned training content with actual job requirements and provided direct connections to potential employers. The placement success rate increased from 62% to 89% within the first 3 months of implementation, while participant satisfaction scores reached historical highs due to improved career outcomes and enhanced support throughout the job search process. Employer partners reported significant satisfaction with graduate quality and retention rates that exceeded their experience with other workforce development programs and traditional recruiting approaches. Several companies expanded their participation to include additional program cohorts and increased their hiring commitments based on positive initial outcomes. The foundation staff embraced operational improvements that enhanced program efficiency while reducing administrative burden through streamlined processes and improved coordination with partner organizations. Staff satisfaction increased as they were able to focus more time on program delivery and participant support, rather than managing inefficient administrative processes and coordination challenges. Financial performance exceeded projections due to improved cost efficiency and enhanced program effectiveness that attracted additional funding from donors who were impressed by measurable outcomes and strategic approach to community impact. The foundation's reputation within the philanthropic community strengthened significantly, leading to partnership opportunities with other charitable organizations and recognition from regional economic development agencies. The success created momentum for expanding the strategic planning approach to other foundation initiatives, including scholarship programs that could benefit from similar outcome-focused modifications and partnership development strategies. The scholarship evaluation revealed opportunities for enhanced effectiveness through improved recipient selection processes, strengthened academic support systems, and expanded mentorship programs that would improve graduation rates while reducing program costs. My analysis of scholarship program performance identified patterns in recipient success that could inform selection criteria modifications, support service enhancements, and partnership development with educational institutions that would improve program outcomes while maintaining the foundation's commitment to supporting first-generation college students and individuals from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. The scholarship program recommendations required extensive research into educational success factors, financial aid optimization strategies, and mentorship program design that leveraged my experience with professional development and career guidance from consulting work, while incorporating best practices from established scholarship foundations and educational support organizations. Patricia and Gregory contributed insights from their educational backgrounds and community connections that enhanced understanding of institutional challenges and opportunities for collaboration with universities, community colleges, and professional organizations that could provide additional resources and support systems for scholarship recipients. The collaborative approach generated comprehensive recommendations that addressed both individual student support needs and systemic improvements in program design and implementation that would create sustainable enhancement in recipient success rates while maintaining cost-effectiveness and alignment with foundation mission priorities. The scholarship program's strategic planning success reinforced the effectiveness of collaborative methodology, while providing additional evidence that professional boundaries could be maintained within family working relationships when roles were clearly defined and mutual respect characterized collaborative processes. The cumulative success of multiple foundation initiatives created expectations for continued expansion of my involvement in strategic planning, implementation support, and ongoing program evaluation across the full range of foundation activities. Board members expressed interest in comprehensive organizational development support that would apply similar analytical approaches to operational efficiency, donor relationship management, and long-term strategic planning that would position the foundation for sustained growth and enhanced community impact. The expansion opportunities represented significant professional growth potential while aligning with community contribution values that had motivated my original career choices. Working with the foundation provided intellectual stimulation, meaningful purpose, and financial compensation that exceeded what would be possible through continued focus on individual consulting clients and traditional small business operational improvement projects. The success also validated my belief that family relationships could support genuine professional collaboration when appropriate boundaries were maintained and mutual respect characterized working relationships. The foundation work demonstrated that Gregory and Patricia could recognize and appreciate my professional capabilities when those capabilities were applied to initiatives they valued and understood. Yet the expansion expectations also created potential complications that could compromise the independence and objectivity that had made Rodriguez Strategic Consulting successful over 6 years of client-focused service delivery. The foundation work was beginning to represent a substantial portion of annual revenue, creating financial dependence that could affect my ability to maintain professional boundaries if family dynamics complicated collaborative processes. The success had also generated informal expectations for involvement in other family business activities and investment initiatives that could benefit from analytical capabilities and operational expertise that had proven valuable for foundation strategic planning and program improvement efforts. These expansion pressures would test my commitment to maintaining the professional principles and clear boundaries that had enabled both consulting business success and effective collaboration on foundation initiatives. The challenge would be determining whether continued involvement could maintain professional standards while avoiding the patterns of unacknowledged contribution and exploited expertise that had characterized previous family collaborative efforts. The foundation project had demonstrated that professional collaboration with family members was possible when appropriate conditions were maintained. But sustaining those conditions would require continued vigilance about boundary maintenance and mutual respect that could be challenging to preserve as expectations expanded and financial stakes increased. The first indication that the professional boundaries I had carefully established with the Whitmore Foundation were beginning to erode appeared during what should have been a routine quarterly board meeting in October. I had arrived with comprehensive documentation of program implementation progress, detailed analysis of outcome metrics, and strategic recommendations for the next phase of foundation development. Instead, the meeting opened with an agenda item that had not been previously discussed or approved through normal governance processes. Patricia announced that the Foundation Board had unanimously decided to expand their charitable giving approach to include real estate investment opportunities that would generate both community benefit and sustainable revenue streams for long-term program funding. The initiative involved identifying undervalued properties in transitioning neighborhoods, renovating them to provide affordable housing options, and utilizing rental income to support foundation activities while contributing to community revitalization efforts. The proposal represented a fundamental departure from the Foundation's established grant-making methodology and would require capabilities in property analysis, market evaluation, construction management, and residential rental operations that extended far beyond traditional nonprofit program administration. The expansion would demand ongoing operational involvement rather than project-based strategic planning consultation. More concerning than the scope expansion was the apparent assumption, evident throughout Patricia's presentation to the board, that I would naturally provide the comprehensive analytical and operational support needed to implement this real estate investment strategy without formal discussion of capacity, compensation, or professional boundaries. Elena has demonstrated exceptional analytical capabilities through her consulting work and foundation strategic planning. Patricia explained to board members who were nodding with evident satisfaction at this elegant solution to their implementation challenges. Her understanding of both our mission priorities and community development implications makes her the ideal person to evaluate properties, coordinate renovations, and manage rental operations in ways that align with our affordable housing objectives while generating sustainable revenue for program expansion. The characterization of my potential involvement revealed several problematic assumptions about professional relationships and service delivery expectations. The Foundation's strategic planning engagement had operated within clearly defined parameters, including specific deliverables, established timelines, and professional compensation structures that reflected the value and complexity of strategic consulting services. The Real Estate Investment Initiative would require ongoing operational responsibilities without clear scope limitations, defined completion criteria, or compensation structures that reflected the expanded range of duties and long-term commitments involved in property acquisition, renovation management, and rental operations. More fundamentally, the assumption that I would provide real estate investment support reflected the same pattern of expectation that had characterized family project involvement over previous years: automatic availability for expanded responsibilities without consultation about interest, capacity, or appropriate professional arrangements. The board discussion proceeded as though my participation was confirmed rather than proposed, with members contributing suggestions about target neighborhoods, property types, and renovation priorities that would optimize both community impact and financial returns. The conversation included detailed planning for implementation phases that assumed my ongoing involvement in property evaluation, contractor coordination, and tenant relationship management. Gregory contributed financial projections and investment analysis that incorporated my anticipated contributions as operational assumptions rather than contracted services subject to negotiation and formal agreement. His calculations included estimated time commitments and capability requirements that exceeded what would be reasonable for consulting engagement while falling below what would justify full-time employment with appropriate compensation and benefit structures. The meeting concluded with assignment of specific next steps that included property research, market analysis, and preliminary site evaluations that would require immediate attention to meet the ambitious implementation timeline the board had established for launching their real estate investment initiative. I left the meeting with growing unease about the expansion expectations and the assumption that professional boundaries established for strategic planning consultation could be seamlessly extended to include ongoing operational responsibilities that would require substantially different commitments and capabilities. The discomfort intensified during subsequent conversations with Patricia about implementation logistics and coordination requirements for the real estate initiative. Her approach to project planning revealed expectations for my involvement that extended well beyond consulting services into operational management and administrative coordination that would consume substantial time and energy while generating unclear compensation arrangements. "We thought you could handle the property research and due diligence during your normal consulting hours," Patricia suggested during a phone conversation about next steps. "Since you already understand our mission priorities and community development objectives, it would be more efficient than hiring separate real estate professionals who would need extensive orientation about our charitable goals and operational requirements." The suggestion that comprehensive real estate investment analysis could be accommodated within existing consulting arrangements revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both the complexity involved in property evaluation and the professional boundaries that had enabled successful collaboration on foundation strategic planning initiatives. Property investment due diligence requires specialized expertise in market analysis, construction evaluation, regulatory compliance, and financial modeling that differs significantly from nonprofit strategic planning consultation. The time requirements alone would necessitate either reducing other client commitments or substantially expanding work schedules in ways that could compromise service quality for existing clients. More problematically, the assumption that real estate investment work could be integrated into current consulting arrangements without formal scope expansion, compensation adjustment, or capacity evaluation suggested that my professional services were being viewed as family resources rather than business relationships subject to normal commercial considerations. The pattern became more apparent when Gregory contacted me directly about coordinating with potential contractor partners for property renovation projects that had not yet been approved or budgeted through normal foundation governance processes. His approach suggested that implementation planning was proceeding based on assumptions about my availability and involvement, rather than confirmed agreements about scope, compensation, or professional arrangements. "Patricia mentioned you would be coordinating the renovation projects," Gregory said during an unexpected phone call that interrupted client work for Rodriguez Strategic Consulting. "I have some contractor contacts who could provide competitive bids for the initial properties we are considering. Could you reach out to them and begin gathering preliminary estimates for renovation costs and timeline requirements?" The request assumed not only my involvement in contractor coordination, but also my availability for immediate action on initiatives that had not been formally approved through established consulting agreements or professional service arrangements. The expectation that I would interrupt current client responsibilities to support family business activities without prior discussion or formal engagement agreements reflected the same problematic dynamics that had characterized previous collaborative efforts. The boundary erosion continued through a series of informal requests and assumptions about my participation in activities that extended beyond the original foundation strategic planning engagement. Patricia began including me in email communications with potential property sellers, real estate agents, and renovation contractors, as though my involvement in these relationships had been formally established and authorized. Gregory forwarded investment analyses and financial projections that incorporated my anticipated contributions, without confirmation of my agreement to provide the analytical support and ongoing involvement that his calculations assumed. The projections included detailed estimates of time commitments and capability requirements that would substantially impact my consulting practice, while generating compensation that did not reflect the expanded scope of responsibility or long-term operational commitments. The most concerning development was the gradual shift in how Foundation board members and staff began referring to my role in organizational communications and strategic planning documents. References to consulting services were being replaced with descriptions that suggested permanent organizational affiliation and ongoing operational responsibility for foundation activities beyond strategic planning support. Meeting minutes and project documentation began characterizing me as foundation operations coordinator rather than strategic planning consultant, reflecting assumptions about permanent involvement and expanded responsibilities that had not been discussed or agreed upon through formal engagement processes. The shift in role characterization created potential complications for Rodriguez Strategic Consulting client relationships and professional reputation within the broader consulting community. Clients who had engaged my services based on independent consulting expertise might question my objectivity and availability if my professional identity became associated with permanent organizational affiliations that could create conflicts of interest or capacity constraints. More fundamentally, the boundary erosion threatened the professional independence and client-focused methodology that had made Rodriguez Strategic Consulting successful over 6 years of business development. The foundation work was beginning to consume time and attention that compromised my ability to serve other clients effectively while creating financial dependence that could affect my capacity to maintain professional boundaries when family dynamics complicated collaborative processes. The warning signs were becoming impossible to ignore, but addressing them directly would require challenging family expectations and potentially damaging relationships that had been improving through successful professional collaboration on foundation initiatives. The choice was between preserving family harmony by accepting expanded expectations or maintaining professional boundaries at the potential cost of collaborative relationships that had been personally and professionally satisfying. The decision was complicated by genuine appreciation for the meaningful nature of foundation work and recognition that the community impact generated through our collaboration exceeded what I could achieve through independent consulting activities alone. The scholarship and workforce development programs were creating measurable improvements in individual lives and broader community economic development that aligned with personal values and professional aspirations. Yet the pattern of boundary erosion and assumption expansion was following trajectories that had proven problematic in previous family collaborative efforts. The expectation that professional services would be available without appropriate compensation, formal agreements, or respect for capacity limitations suggested that successful collaboration had not fundamentally changed family dynamics regarding recognition and appreciation of contributions. The foundation work had initially appeared to represent genuine professional partnership, characterized by mutual respect and appropriate acknowledgement of expertise and effort. The early success had validated my belief that family relationships could support collaborative work when proper conditions were maintained and professional standards were honored. But the emerging pattern suggested that the respectful collaboration had been contingent on the newness of the professional relationship, rather than representing fundamental changes in how family members understood and valued contributions from others. As familiarity increased and successful outcomes generated confidence, the expectations and assumptions were reverting to historical patterns that had characterized previous collaborative efforts. The warning signs indicated that continued involvement would likely lead to the same dynamics of unacknowledged contribution and exploited expertise that had made family collaboration problematic in the past. The challenge would be determining whether the meaningful nature of foundation work and community impact justified accepting those dynamics, or whether professional principles required addressing boundary erosion before it progressed to more problematic levels. The lessons from building Rodriguez Strategic Consulting had taught me that successful professional relationships required clear boundaries, mutual respect, and compensation structures that reflected the value and complexity of services provided. These principles had enabled 6 years of client satisfaction and business growth that demonstrated their practical effectiveness for maintaining sustainable working relationships. Applying those same principles to family collaborative work would require difficult conversations about expectations, assumptions, and professional boundaries that could damage relationships while protecting professional integrity and long-term sustainability of involvement in meaningful community impact initiatives. The defining moment came during a family dinner at Patricia and Gregory's home in November, when what should have been a casual evening meal transformed into an impromptu business planning session that revealed how completely the boundaries between family relationships and professional services had dissolved in their minds. The evening began normally enough with conversation about Caroline's latest photography exhibition in San Francisco and updates on various community activities that filled Patricia's social calendar. The atmosphere was comfortable and relaxed, suggesting that the professional collaboration on foundation initiatives had indeed strengthened family relationships without creating the complications I had been monitoring. But halfway through the main course, Gregory shifted the conversation toward foundation business, with the casual assumption that family dinner provided an appropriate venue for detailed operational planning discussions that would typically require formal meetings and documented decision-making processes. We received approval from the City Planning Department for the Hawthorne District property acquisition, he announced while cutting his steak, as though municipal regulatory approval was typical dinner table conversation. The zoning variance came through faster than expected, so we can move forward with the renovation timeline we discussed. Elena, could you contact the contractors next week to finalize bids and coordinate the construction schedule? The request was delivered with the tone of routine family coordination rather than professional service assignment, reflecting complete erasure of boundaries between personal relationships and business collaboration. Gregory was not requesting consulting services or negotiating project scope, but rather delegating operational responsibilities, as though my involvement in property management had been established through family obligation rather than professional engagement. Patricia reinforced the boundary confusion by immediately building on Gregory's operational planning, with additional assignments that assumed my availability and involvement in activities that extended far beyond the original foundation's strategic planning work. The neighborhood association meeting is Thursday evening, she added, passing the salad bowl with the same casual manner used for requesting contractor coordination. They want to discuss community impact and ensure that our renovation plans align with their development priorities. You should attend as our foundation representative since you understand both the technical details and our charitable mission. The assumption that I would serve as foundation representative in community meetings reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of professional relationships and organizational authority. Strategic planning consultants provide analytical support and recommendations, but they do not typically represent client organizations in external stakeholder relationships or regulatory processes. More concerning was the expectation that I would attend evening community meetings that conflicted with other professional commitments, while receiving no compensation for time invested or recognition of the expertise being utilized for organizational representation purposes. The conversation continued with additional operational assignments delivered in the same casual manner, each assumption building on previous expectations to create comprehensive involvement in foundation activities that extended far beyond consulting services into operational management and administrative coordination. The property insurance agent needs someone to walk through the renovation specifications to adjust coverage levels. Gregory continued, apparently unaware that he was delegating multiple hours of specialized work without discussion of capacity or compensation. And the city requires updated architectural plans that incorporate community input from the neighborhood association meeting. Patricia added her own operational expectations with equal disregard for professional boundaries or appropriate service agreements. The foundation board retreat is scheduled for January, and we will need comprehensive presentations on both the real estate investment results and strategic planning for the next fiscal year. You could coordinate with the retreat facility about meeting space requirements and catering arrangements as well. The accumulation of assumed responsibilities revealed the extent to which successful collaboration had been interpreted as evidence that professional services could be treated as family resources available without appropriate compensation structures or respect for capacity limitations and competing professional commitments. The casual delivery of these expectations during family dinner demonstrated complete erosion of understanding about the difference between collaborative professional relationships and exploited family labor. The foundation work had reverted to the same dynamic that characterized previous family projects, where my contributions were valued for their utility while being minimized as routine assistance rather than specialized expertise requiring appropriate recognition and compensation. My attempt to address the boundary confusion directly was met with responses that revealed how deeply entrenched these expectations had become and how completely Gregory and Patricia had convinced themselves that current arrangements were reasonable and appropriate. I appreciate the confidence in my capabilities, I said carefully, but these responsibilities extend beyond consulting services into ongoing operational management that would require different engagement structures and compensation arrangements. Perhaps we should schedule a formal meeting to discuss scope expansion and professional service agreements. Gregory looked genuinely surprised by my response, as though the suggestion that operational management might require formal agreements was an unexpected complication rather than standard professional practice. "Elena, we are not talking about major new responsibilities," he said with the dismissive tone that suggested my concerns were excessive and unreasonable. "These are just administrative details that need coordination by someone who understands our objectives and operational requirements. You have been involved in the planning process, so naturally you are the logical person to handle implementation coordination. The characterization of comprehensive property management, community stakeholder relations, regulatory compliance coordination, and board retreat planning as administrative details revealed complete disconnection from the reality of what these responsibilities entailed and the professional expertise required for effective execution." Patricia reinforced the minimization with additional comments that demonstrated similar lack of understanding about the complexity and time requirements associated with the activities they were casually assigning during family dinner conversation. "It is really just project coordination," she added, with the confident tone of someone who had never personally managed construction projects, regulatory compliance processes, or organizational retreat planning. "Since you already understand our mission and have relationships with the contractors and community stakeholders, it should be straightforward to keep everything organized and moving forward according to schedule." The assumption that existing relationships and mission understanding automatically translated into capacity for comprehensive operational management reflected the same problematic thinking that had characterized previous family collaborative efforts. Complex professional responsibilities were being reduced to simple coordination tasks that anyone with basic organizational skills could handle effectively. More fundamentally, the conversation revealed that successful strategic planning work had not generated appreciation for professional expertise or understanding of appropriate service delivery models. Instead, the success had been interpreted as evidence that I was available for expanded involvement without corresponding expansion of compensation or recognition of professional boundaries. The pattern became more apparent over subsequent weeks as additional assumptions about my availability and involvement in foundation activities accumulated without discussion or formal agreement. Email communications began including me in operational decisions and coordination requirements, as though my participation had been formally established and approved through appropriate governance processes. Meeting invitations arrived for stakeholder conferences, regulatory hearings, and vendor coordination sessions that assumed my attendance and participation without consultation about schedule availability or professional capacity constraints. The invitations were sent with the same casual approach used for family social events, rather than professional service requests requiring advanced planning and appropriate compensation arrangements. Gregory began forwarding property management communications and contractor inquiries directly to me for response and coordination, effectively delegating ongoing operational responsibilities without discussion of appropriate service agreements or compensation structures. The forwarded communications included complex questions about construction specifications, regulatory compliance requirements, and financial coordination that required specialized expertise and substantial time commitments. Patricia included me in strategic planning discussions with other nonprofit organizations about collaborative initiatives and partnership opportunities that would require ongoing involvement in activities extending beyond foundation work into broader community development efforts. Her approach suggested that my professional services were available for any initiative that aligned with foundation mission priorities, regardless of formal agreements or capacity limitations. The accumulation of these expectations created operational pressures that began affecting my ability to serve other consulting clients effectively. Rodriguez's strategic consulting commitments were being compromised by foundation activities that consumed time and attention without appropriate compensation or clear scope limitations. Existing clients began expressing concerns about reduced availability and delayed response times that could damage professional relationships built over years of consistent service delivery and client-focused attention. The foundation work was creating conflicts of interest and capacity constraints that threatened the independent consulting practice that had provided both professional satisfaction and financial security over 6 years of business development. The situation required direct confrontation of boundary erosion and assumption expansion before family dynamics completely undermined professional integrity and client relationships that represented the foundation of my career and financial independence. But addressing these issues directly would require challenging family expectations that had been building over months of successful collaboration and apparent mutual satisfaction with working relationships. The conversation would potentially damage family relationships that had been improving, while protecting professional principles that were essential for long-term business sustainability. The choice was between preserving family harmony by accepting exploitative working arrangements, or maintaining professional integrity at the potential cost of collaborative relationships that had generated meaningful community impact and personal satisfaction through aligned mission work. The lessons from building Rodriguez Strategic Consulting provided clear guidance about the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries and professional standards in all client relationships. These principles had enabled successful business development and satisfied client outcomes over 6 years of independent consulting work. The foundation collaboration had initially appeared to demonstrate that family relationships could support professional partnership when appropriate conditions were maintained. But the emerging patterns indicated that respectful professional treatment had been temporary rather than representing fundamental changes in family dynamics regarding recognition and compensation of expertise and effort. The warning signs had progressed to operational pressures that required immediate attention to prevent further erosion of professional boundaries and protect both business relationships and personal integrity from family expectations that were reverting to historical patterns of unacknowledged contribution and exploited expertise. The defining moment came during a family dinner at Patricia and Gregory's home in November, when what should have been a casual evening meal transformed into an impromptu business planning session that revealed how completely the boundaries between family relationships and professional services had dissolved in their minds. The evening began normally enough, with conversation about Carolyn's latest photography exhibition in San Francisco, and updates on various community activities that filled Patricia's social calendar. The atmosphere was comfortable and relaxed, suggesting that the professional collaboration on foundation initiatives had indeed strengthened family relationships without creating the complications I had been monitoring. But halfway through the main course, Gregory shifted the conversation toward foundation business, with the casual assumption that family dinner provided an appropriate venue for detailed operational planning discussions that would typically require formal meetings and documented decision-making processes. We received approval from the City Planning Department for the Hawthorne District property acquisition, he announced while cutting his steak, as though municipal regulatory approval was typical dinner table conversation. The zoning variance came through faster than expected, so we can move forward with the renovation timeline we discussed. Elena, could you contact the contractors next week to finalize bids and coordinate the construction schedule? The request was delivered with the tone of routine family coordination rather than professional service assignment, reflecting complete erasure of boundaries between personal relationships and business collaboration. Gregory was not requesting consulting services or negotiating project scope, but rather delegating operational responsibilities, as though my involvement in property management had been established through family obligation rather than professional engagement. Patricia reinforced the boundary confusion by immediately building on Gregory's operational planning with additional assignments that assumed my availability and involvement in activities that extended far beyond the original foundation strategic planning work. The neighborhood association meeting is Thursday evening, quote, she added, passing the salad bowl with the same casual manner used for requesting contractor coordination. They want to discuss community impact and ensure that our renovation plans align with their development priorities. You should attend as our foundation representative since you understand both the technical details and our charitable mission. The assumption that I would serve as foundation representative in community meetings reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of professional relationships and organizational authority. Strategic planning consultants provide analytical support and recommendations, but they do not typically represent client organizations in external stakeholder relationships or regulatory processes. More concerning was the expectation that I would attend evening community meetings that conflicted with other professional commitments, while receiving no compensation for time invested or recognition of the expertise being utilized for organizational representation purposes. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.